welcome, junkies. We're excited to have you here with us today. We are going to have an awesome podcast. Today we're going over a book that Lance recently read, and he was excited to share some of the key things that were in it that really caught his eye and made him think a little bit about some of the tactics and things that we can do as elk hunters, and we're just excited to share this with you. So, Lance, go ahead and take it over.
Yeah, so to date, we've mostly focused on sharing stories on the podcast, but today we thought we could do things a little bit differently. There's a lot of sources out there for knowledge, and books being one of them. And I recently read this book called Elk Tactics by Don Laubach and Mark Henckel. The book was published back in 1998. Now, I know 1998 sounds like a long time ago. Yeah, that's when Google was first founded. Bill Clinton was the president, but this book was written quite a while ago, but trust me, it's got a lot of really great information in it. The majority of the information is very relevant today. There are a couple of chapters in there where they talk about technology, and of course, after that many years, technology's changed quite a bit.
Yeah,
maybe that chapter wasn't so relevant, but the rest of it was really interesting, and I really enjoyed reading it. Two or three things that really stood out to me in this book. One of them was that it just reinforced the knowledge that I've gained over the years.
Yeah.
Reading the book, just picking out certain things, just helped kind of reinforce some things for me. The second thing, too, is there was a lot of new tactics and a lot of new ideas that I hadn't really thought of. And when I first bought this book, I had bought it several years ago, and I started reading it, and I was kind of maybe a little prideful about it. I thought, I kind of know this stuff, and then I kind of put it down. But I decided when I went on this last vacation that I thought, well, this would be a good book to take with me and read. And I just loved it. I really enjoyed the book. Even though there are things that I was familiar with, I already knew, it helped reinforce those things, and there was a lot of new stuff in it for me. The third thing, though, that was really interesting to me was a lot of those tactics and experience shared by the authors made me reflect on experiences that I've had over the years and maybe how I could have done things differently. And we'll kind of talk about some of those things. So today's episode, we're going to explore some of the specific information laid out in the book, which we hope will help us all become better hunters. We have no affiliation with the authors, so we have nothing to gain by this book. We're not promoting it, just so the listeners know. However, if you're really looking for a good book, this is one that I do highly recommend, whether you're somebody just starting out or someone who's a veteran. There's a lot of good information in it. It's kind of funny, as hunters, we're always willing to spend a lot more money on technology, right?
Oh, yeah.
The latest bow, the best arrows, all that good stuff. But in my opinion, just knowledge is so critical, right? And so spending $15, $16, $17 on a book to provide some additional knowledge, I think is money really well spent. So let's see. So maybe we'll just kind of jump right into it. What I'm going to do is I thought I would read some excerpts from the book, and we'll just kind of talk about them.
Sounds good.
All right, let me just jump right into it. So the first thing he talks about, I shouldn't really say the first thing, but one of the things he talks about is habits. And he says, old habits are powerful things, and all of us have established our hunting habits over the years. We tend to hunt in particular places. We hunt them in particular ways. We hunt them at a particular time. We come back year after year and do the same things over and over again. While there is much to be said for knowledge, experience, and tradition in elk hunting, the truth of the matter, sometimes we get into a rut. As a result, while we reap the benefits of all good things about those habits, we are also doomed to repeat our own mistakes. He goes on to say, most bow hunters have established a definite hunting routine. And I think we could say this not just about bow hunters, but any kind of hunter, really.
Yeah, I agree.
They rise in the pre-dawn darkness, hunt the first few hours of daylight in the cool temperatures, return to camp for a late breakfast and a long lounging period at midday, and then they hunt in the last few hours of the day until darkness. In a way, that's a good plan. You get to hunt in all the cool hours, you get to lay up and relax in the heat of the day, and you don't have to try and stay on your feet and hunt through what is often 14 or 15 hours of daylight. The trouble is that we get fixed on this hunting habit. We seem to be cursed to repeat these things day after hunting day, and year after hunting year. And I can't help but think that the elk know it too, especially the pressured elk. They're on the lookout for the hunters early in the morning. They know they're safe in their beds at midday. They're wary, and they push their evening activities until the brink of legal shooting time. They almost seem to know that the daylight is too long for a hunter to be out there all day. They seem to know that the nights are too short for a hunter to recharge his batteries with sleep before he has to wake up to hunt again. I think it's time all of us rethink our old habits. There are some hunting opportunities being missed out. So I don't know what you think about it, Dave, but I know me personally, I've really have fallen into this habit.
Sure.
I mean, over the years, really, I have spent most of my time hunting mornings, going back to camp
Yep.
during the day, whether it's eating lunch, whatever it may be, and then going back and eat hunting in the evening. And even if I do stay out all day, we have a tendency to just kind of relax and joke around, have a good time more in the middle of the day, and not spend so much time hunting in the day. You know, the author stated, most hunters quit for the day because they think all the elk are in their beds and the bugling is over. What I found over the years, however, is that elk still bugle in the middle of the day. And this reminds me of an experience that I had last year. Me and my brother-in-law, we'd gone out for the morning hunt, the elk hunt, and as usual, we returned back to camp. I'm sitting there, he's sitting there, we're just kind of relaxing, eating a lunch, as we usually do.
Yeah.
And what do we hear? We hear a bugle.
Middle of the day.
Middle of the day. It's 1 p.m.
Jeez.
We hear a bugle. And we both obviously just turn and look at each other and we're like, was that a bugle? And we're like, yeah, that was a bugle. I heard it. You heard it? Okay. And so I was the only one that had a tag at that point. And so I grabbed my gear and we both just take off towards the sound of that bugle.
Sure.
And what was crazy about it is the one bugle turned into multiple bugles.
Really?
And this isn't that far from where we were camped. I dare say this was maybe like 400, 500 yards from camp. And so we head off and we start hearing antlers crashing. If you've ever heard elk, when they fight, they kind of make this squeal noise. And so we're working closer towards the bugle and these two bulls are just going at it. I get within about 60 yards. They're clashing antlers. They're fighting. One bull knocks the other bull over onto his back. He's laid out flat. And the problem was, though, they were right in some thick timber.
Yeah.
And even though I got within 60 yards, once that bull got knocked down, he got back up. The two just separated. And
they went to their own bedrooms.
Yeah. Sadly, unfortunately, in the rush of it all, me nor my brother-in-law grabbed our calls. So in that instant when they when they broke up and started to walk away, I would have called, but I left it at camp. It was just the heat of the moment.
Yeah.
But there's just a great example. 1:00 in the afternoon. Here's these two bulls in the middle of the rut, and they're fighting right there, and it was awesome. I mean, the amount of bugling those two are doing, just like back and forth in in each other's faces, and fighting it out. It was awesome. So yeah,
that'd have been way cool to see.
So there's I think a really good example of elk being active right there in the middle of the day.
Well, yeah,
so.
I think everybody gets in that habit, whether you're an elk hunter or a deer hunter. It's just common knowledge that everybody hunts in the morning and the night, and that's it.
Yeah.
For generally speaking, I mean, there's quite a few people lately that I think have been doing more hunting in the middle of the day just because it's become popular. And like you said, if you're willing to put in the time and the energy and effort, then you never know what you're going to come across.
Yeah, and he's specifically talking about habits, and he's focused on the midday hunt. But in general, I just think we all should reevaluate our habits.
Yeah.
Keep the good ones,
sure.
But the bad ones, maybe we need to change some things up, try some new things, because you just never know what might work out for you during the hunt.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I think it's just kind of a general good idea for all of us to reevaluate our habits and the way we do things. For me, I'm going to start focusing more on hunting during the day. I have in the last 2 years. Like you said, I've listened to other podcasts. I've listened to other people talk, and I've heard a lot of great success stories of people that hunt in the middle of the day. And so I started doing that over the last couple of years. And although I haven't killed an elk in the middle of the day, I've gotten into the elk in the middle of the day.
Encounters.
Yeah. So, all right, cool. Let's see. The next area that we'll focus on is he talks about location of elk. He says elk tend to be where you find them. They aren't always in places where you plan them to be. You have to be ready for them anytime. And to me, that just ain't that the truth, right?
Right.
For me particularly, I always make a plan to hunt a particular area where I think the elk might be. And that's a good thing, right? That's not a bad thing to do. However, I have a tendency to go from point A, beeline it to point B
as fast
as I can to get there. And in my mind, I'm visualizing the elk, here's a wallow, or here's a whatever it may be, right?
Yeah.
And I have a tendency just to try to get there as quick as I can. And the crazy thing is typically there is a mile or more between point A and point B the elk can be, right?
Yeah.
And I have bumped elk along the way, and I often wonder how many elk have I just passed up.
Yeah.
So I could not agree more when he talks about they aren't always in the places you plan them to be, and you have to be ready at any time. So for me, the lesson really learned there is I'd got to take more time as I try to go to my location and hunt it, right? Hunt your way as you get there. So
I think that's a great idea. I mean, it'll definitely make your day go a little bit longer too if you slow down.
And you know how hard that is for me because I'm just not a patient person, and I like to move. You guys got to joke around and call me a goat. And
he is the goat.
And I don't know what it is about me. I just like to move.
Yeah. Lance is one side to the next in less than 10 minutes, and who knows? Yeah.
Passing up all the elk along the way.
That's right.
All right. So that was, talking a little bit about location of elk. The next part we thought we'd chat about is about calling position. The book states, the best calling position for elk and almost every other species I've ever tried to work has always been from above. Being the same level with them can be effective too. Not only do you get a better view of the animal from a higher elevation, but elk have a tendency to move uphill when coming to a call. I don't know what your thoughts are on this, Dave. I just thinking through it myself, I've never really thought of it that way, that the elk have a tendency to move up to a call. I can see where you got to be cautious about that, especially when it comes to thermals, right?
Yeah.
So whether you're below them or above them, you're really going to have to watch those thermals. I like the idea of being at the same elevation as the animal because I think you have less of a chance of the thermals fouling things up for you. But I hadn't thought about it, and it's definitely something I'm going to think about more when I'm actually calling to an animal. Does it have more of a tendency to want to come uphill than it does downhill? I don't know. That's what the author states here. And even in the book, he says, I don't really know why, but over the years, he's seen that. And so that's something I'm going to look forward and kind of watch for.
Yeah, and I think too, you got to look at the topography because the area that we hunted this last year, we came over this rise and we basically skylined. And next thing I know, I look down in this little canyon and all the elk are looking up at us. And I was like, oh, they totally saw us because we came right over that ridge line.
Yeah.
And they spotted us. But in that canyon, there was a big cliff right at the head of it. And they couldn't physically come up that part of it. They could go up either side. But as soon as they saw us, they just started working down the canyon. And we're like, oh, crap, they saw us.
Yeah.
But I think that kind of has to do, if you can check your topography, that might help a little bit where you can set up to have an idea of where they are.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, the next thing he talks about is the setup, and he's talking about setting up for calling elk. So he says first, the obvious, you have to locate an area where elk are likely to be. If there aren't any elk within earshot, you're not going to call one in. So that's kind of obvious, right? I mean, you're not going to just go set up somewhere, there's no elk in the area, and you start calling. If nothing can hear you.
Ripping off a bugle.
Yeah, nothing's going to come in. And that might, to me, that's obviously sounds obvious, but maybe not so obvious to someone who's just starting out. They think, well, I can just go into an area. There's elk generally in the area. I'm just going to start calling, and they're going to come in. But you definitely want to find an area where likely the elk are going to be. Look for elk sign, right? Whether there's rubs or poop on the ground or whatever it may be.
Tracks.
Find some sign and make sure you know that there's elk in the area. So that was the first obvious thing he said. He says, second, call from a position above the elk. Setting up above the elk will give you a number of advantages. For one thing, elk are far more comfortable coming up a slope to a caller. For some reason, they don't mind coming up. Calling from the same elevation as the elk is the next best option. This is similar to what he said earlier. Trying to call an elk down to you is by far the worst choice. Aside from the elk's tendencies to want to come up, calling from above, especially in fairly open timber, gives the advantage of good visibility. You can see farther. You can spot an elk at a longer distance. If you can see the elk and how they respond to your calling, you can adjust your calling to better bring them in. And then third, he says, make sure you're in a position not just to shoot, but to get a clear, uncluttered shot. Too often, this is another part of the setup where a hunter fails. For some reason, hunters feel they have to surround themselves with cover. My answer has always been to set up in front of the cover, using the cover behind me to break up my outline, then try to get low. For whatever reason, the sight of a man standing upright has always acted like a danger sign to elk. Things low to the ground don't seem to bother them as much. One aspect of setup that's often overlooked is the scent a hunter leaves behind. These animals have an incredible sense of smell. Elk, deer, and animals can smell where you've walked. So, I guess, I've never really given much thought to the direction, uphill or downhill, that an elk may take, but I certainly understand the idea that at least a lot of the areas that I hunt, the elk are moving down to feed in the mornings.
Right.
They're moving back uphill to bed, and in the evenings they're moving back down to feed. And I think that's generally the case in a lot of areas. They're feeding down into meadows, and then they're going back up in the thick timber to bed. I think so. That makes some pretty good sense to me when I think about it. The thing that was interesting here, and I think a lot of people know this now, but I think as hunters in general, we like to hide. We think we're supposed to hide.
We're so sneaky. Yeah. We can hide behind this little bush.
Yeah, and that's his point. Is when we do that, when we try to hide or we try to get within some thick trees, kind of like a little blind, we're impeding our shot. We're giving ourselves less
shooting
lanes to try to shoot that animal. And we really need to be out in front of the cover, use that cover to break up our outline, as he said. Trust your camouflage that you're wearing to help break you up. I think the key there is not moving, right?
Yeah.
And so, but that happens. I think as hunters, we just, in general, think, well, I'm gonna hide right here, and he's not gonna see me. But the next thing you know, you've got no way to shoot him. So,
and I think if you can find some place that's got a little bit of shade that you can hide in the shade too, I think that helps.
Yeah. Yep. Let's see. So the next part, he just talks about persistence, and this is just kind of short. He says persistence pays off. Patience in almost any form pays off too. For most of us, patience is something that has to be learned. And I can tell you, as we talked earlier, patience is something that I've really got to work on.
Yeah.
It's not something that I was just born with. It's something that I have to focus on, work on. But it's just kind of difficult to do. It reminds me, years ago when I was hunting with my father-in-law, when I was fishing with my father-in-law, we were fishing this river, and it was just kind of an eddy bend.
Mm-hmm.
And I sat there and fished it several times, cast out, let it go down there correct. Nothing. And I don't know, I might have waited maybe 5 minutes. I don't know.
Right.
Nothing. So I leave. I come back after, I don't know, maybe it's half hour, an hour, whatever. And there's my father-in-law, and he's fishing the exact same spot. But he's fishing it over and over. And he stayed in that spot for at least half hour because he just knew there had to be something there. And what does he do? He pulls out like a 21-inch cutthroat.
Big
out
old
of the
monster.
Spot. And it was just that persistence and that patience just paid off. And I know, me personally, I'm losing opportunities when I'm not being patient and when I'm not being persistent.
Well, and I think that's everybody. They want that action. So some people might think, hey, if I move and I cover 20 miles in a day, I'm going to have more encounters. Yeah, you might, but there's also that opportunity that you might miss encounters as well if you slow down just a little bit and listen and look at the sign, like you said, and just try to find where they're hiding.
Yeah.
Find those little honey holes. Yeah,
we talked about this after our last podcast. We were just chatting with Damon Stone about one of the guys that I hunt with, how he's very patient. He's very persistent. He moves very slow, and he has a lot of encounters with elk. It's just his style of hunting, and he's really good at it. So something for me to especially work on, and something I think for all the listeners just to think about it. It's kind of hard too for me in that I want to be aggressive,
right?
But you've got to balance that being aggressive and being patient at the same time.
Yeah, I think there's time for both.
Yeah.
And there definitely are times that you need to be aggressive, and there's times that you need to be patient. And
Just try to figure those out.
And it's just a fine balance between the two.
If I knew how to do all this, I'd have an elk every year, right?
That's the idea.
Let's see. So what else do we got here? He says, and when I say he, I don't know which author is actually stating this, but in the book it says, by far the best chance you'll have to bring that bull elk in as if you can somehow get ahead of him. Calling an elk in a direction it wants to go is definitely easier than turning him back in a direction where he doesn't. And you and I were chatting about this earlier. I think about so many times that I've tried to draw a bull back to me, and it just doesn't seem to work out.
Well, and they're constantly, moving 20 yards in front of you.
Oh, they're so fast.
And they can just book it through those terrain like no other. And
yeah.
And you're like, no, get back here.
It's funny that we talk about this. So we had a camera. This was 2 years ago. We had a trail camera up on the mountain, and there was a bull and its cows were down in the meadow, and I was down in the meadow, but it wasn't quite shooting light. As soon as it was shooting light, the elk started to move up the hill. I swear I was right on that bull's heels. I thought, man, I'm right behind him. I'm just going to, just slowly keep following him. It was funny when I never did catch up to him.
Right.
I bugled, he bugled, I cow called, he bugled, but it was just a back and forth, but he just kept moving off. So when we got back to camp, we pulled the memory card. It was towards the end, and I looked at the time, and here's this. He was a younger 6x6 bull.
Yeah.
But I was like, I can't remember, it was something like 8 minutes behind him.
Really?
And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. I thought,
so you showed up on the camera 8 minutes after he did?
I showed up on the camera like 8 minutes after him, and I was like, no way was I that far back of him. But they move, like you said, I mean, these elk can just traverse these hills like it's nothing. I don't care how good a shape you are or in.
We don't have legs as long as them. And
so
muscles.
The time, I guess, was going a lot faster than I thought.
Huh.
But, good point. I think that he makes there. Try to call them in the direction that they want to go. Obviously, there's times when you want to try to draw them back, especially if you spook one or whatever it may be. Try to call them back in, but if at all possible, get ahead of them. Obviously, once again, watch your thermals, but try to draw, call to them and have them coming in the direction you want them to go. And just as I had mentioned earlier, the book made me reflect on situations I've experienced, and one of the ones I experience often is the elk are down in the meadow. I get there in the morning in the meadow, and they start moving up right into the timber as soon as daylight kind of starts and before you can really get a chance to shoot. And you're just trying to draw them back down. It's pretty much impossible, right? So they're going up to bed. So I'd be far better off to try to get up above them. Do your best
in the dark.
Yeah, in the dark. Do your best to try to figure out where you think they're going, or at least in the general area. Of course, once again, we talked about watch your thermals, but that's a lot better chance, I think.
Well, and I think that's a key if you have a hunting partner. And if you have some sort of communication that you can have with them, so that person could stay down in the meadow and say, hey, they're moving off this direction. You need to move XYZ direction as well. And, you could switch back and forth doing that and just have some sort of play-by-play going on, I guess.
Yep. Let's see. So the next thing talks about, it says, but for just about all my calling sequences, I'll start with cow sounds. So he's talking about general calling here. He says, I'll make one or two and make them pretty soft. I'll add more volume to my calling as I go along and try to reach out to elk that may be a distance away. That's one major modification I've made to my calling over the years. When I first began making cow talk, I thought you couldn't overdo it with loudness. Since then, I've compared my calling to fishing a pond. When you fish, your first casts are close to the bank for fish that may be nearby. Then as you continue to fish, you keep casting farther and farther. When you do your cow sounds, you start out with soft sounds to cover the area around you. Elk have exceptional hearing. Those first soft sounds can sometimes be heard several hundred yards away. By the time you reach full loudness, and if sound conditions are just right to allow the sound to carry, You can literally pull elk in from a mile away if you have the patience to wait for them. And this is something that stood out to me again is, I need to try this more. I think in a lot of times when I start out calling, I sound, I want to say needy or begging. I'm like, begging the elk to come in. And so I'm loud, right? Yeah. So I'm too loud. Instead of starting off with some really soft cow mews, because you never know, there could be something really close by. Yeah. And if you just blow a cow call, you might just freak them out and they take off. So start off with some of those soft mews and so forth.
So you're moving to bear talk there for sows.
Not sows. Let's see. So the next part, he talks about glassing. I don't hear a lot of hunters talking about glassing when they're bow hunting, especially in timber. So I thought this was kind of interesting to talk about. Something that stood out to me mainly because it is something that I focus on. He says also, don't underestimate the importance of glassing with a good pair of binoculars when you're calling blind. So especially saying, hey, you don't know where the elk are, so you're calling blind. He says, to me, it seems to be an odd angle or a particular color that gives elk away. The angle of an elk's ears is something that's engraved in your mind after you've seen a lot of elk. There's the color of the antlers that can tip you off. It can be the off color of the elk's legs. And he goes on to talk a little bit more about it, but it's something that I've just learned really over the years because I do hunt in a lot of thick timber.
Sure.
And there's a lot of shadows. And so we try to carry, I don't carry the best binoculars, but I carry, good enough ones at least for the location I'm at because I don't have to see really far away, but you want good light. But really it's, the light colored tan of the elk's rump, whether it's the light colored color of their body, it's their dark legs, it's the color and shape of their antlers. As you mentioned, maybe it's the twitching of the ears. All of these things are things as hunters we ought to be able to recognize and look for when we're going through that kind of timber. Because elk will just stand there.
Oh, yeah.
They see you. Or even if they don't see a lot of, they're just standing there, and you've got to be able to pick out those little subtleties.
Yeah. Well, and I think, too, it depends on what time of year you're out. I mean, if it's not during the rut, then you got to use your glasses. You can't call them in if they're not calling. So if you're out there early season before the rut and the bugling fest is going on, then, using binoculars or even a spotting scope of some sort just to pick apart the country to try to find something to go after is key.
Yep. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. This last year, I had this same situation. I was working through the timbers, working real slow. I'm working down the hill, and I'm doing just this. I'm just walking slow, looking through all this thick lodgepole pines, and just looking for those little subtleties, right? And I looked off to my left, and I don't know, maybe it's 80 yards, 100 yards away.
Yeah.
I see a little bit of tan, and I thought, okay, and I just kept walking, but it immediately hit me. I thought, how could that have been an elk? Because most of the time you just second guess, you just doubt yourself, right? I'm just seeing things.
Because you want to see something.
Yeah, you do. You want to see something. So a lot of times you are just seeing something, but you're better off checking, and that's exactly what happened in this situation. I kept walking, but I thought, oh, God, that could have been an elk. So I stopped, backed up a little bit, looked over, and I'm looking close, and sure enough, it's an elk bedded down.
Oh.
And so it was the tan of the body, barely could make it out, but this bull's bedded down, and then eventually I'm looking closer, and I'm like, oh, there's an antler, and it was still in velvet.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just stood there, and I thought, well, here's a great opportunity. I'm just going to wait this bull out. I'm just going to sit here. Maybe he'll get up. He'll make a mistake. But eventually, I got my binoculars on him, and I could see he was a pretty young bull.
Oh.
And
Not
so
something that you wanted to go
So
after.
it was the first day.
Oh, yeah.
You know how it always is. First day, you're just like, do I really want to take this bull? Looking back, and maybe I should have. But
if you're willing to shoot it on the last day, shoot it on the first day,
right.
Lance.
That's so true. So I passed on it. Now, the interesting thing was, this is just kind of totally off subject here, but this bull, I eventually decided I wasn't going to take him. So I thought, well, I'm just going to see how close I can kind of get to him. And I was so sneaking, I thought maybe I'd get some video of him. Well, he stood up. He saw me.
Yeah.
And when he turned, I could see something shiny on him, on his, like kind of on his shoulder towards his back a little bit. And I was like, what is that? And I could see, and he turns his head and he starts licking it.
Oh.
And I'm like, is he, has he got a wound or something? Sure enough, I put my binoculars on him and it looked like someone had shot him.
Really?
Yeah. So he was wounded. And he got up and he left. And I thought about, I was like, well, maybe do I put him out of his misery? Do I go ahead and shoot him? I tried calling him. He did come back. And he stood there looking to try to find, of course, where this cow is that doesn't exist. But it didn't work out. But anyways, just another example of just looking for those subtleties.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what the ratio is. Is it 1 out of 10, 1 out of 20, whatever it is that
you always look at those rocks and you're like, oh,
yeah, they're sticks. You see a branch looks like an antler. Turns out it's not. There's times when they have legs are a big one. You just all of a sudden see some like really dark leg-looking thing, and that's
if you don't have binos, then you can't check it out.
Yep. So binos are nice to have. I think it's a good idea, especially when you're in some of that thick stuff. He talks also about equipment, and here's what it says in the book. It says, in some ways, you already have the things you absolutely need: a level of knowledge, a desire to learn more, a motivation to pursue elk, a will to succeed. Past that, everything is just one more piece of equipment. And, he's talking in this section about equipment in general, how we spend a lot of money, right? All of us hunters, we like to spend a lot of money on equipment. We think the better equipment we got, the better hunter we're going to be.
The better chance.
Yeah, and I think his point here really is just that, the importance of having knowledge, having a desire to learn, being motivated. These are all things that are keys to success that you've got to have as a foundation. And then all that equipment after that, it's just more equipment.
Sure. And I think the key with equipment too is just get what you can afford.
Yeah.
I mean, I know we've talked about it over the years. When we started out, our stuff was Walmart special, anything we can get, and the local Salvation Army, or
I don't even want to think about it.
And I mean, it worked. Was it the most comfortable stuff in the world? Probably not, but it works. If you just got to get out there as the key. Yeah,
and I mean, in no way are we knocking having the best equipment. I'm all for having the best equipment. If I can have the best bow and the whatever it may be, the best camouflage, it's lightweight, it's breathable, it's stretchy, it's got a dull look to it, it's quiet. Yeah, I want that camo, but I think just don't ignore the importance of the other things, the knowledge, the other things that you need to do. And so, anyways, kind of interesting, something for us all to just remember.
Yep.
The other thing he talks about is camouflage. So he says, let's see, in the book, he says the best camouflage of all is a person who is not moving, no matter what he or she happens to be wearing. Movement is the single most critical part of not being detected by wildlife. And I think he's specifically talking visually detected, right? You can be detected by, obviously, smell. But if you are moving, it doesn't make any difference what you're wearing. The animal will see you. In the same vein, keeping a low profile will go a long way toward hiding you from an animal's eyes. It has always amazed me, in fact, that when you hear stories from other hunters of how close animals came to them, it was never because the hunter was wearing the best camo. It was a matter of holding absolutely still, or lying down, or playing the wind right, or a combination of all three of these things, or of these things. So,
yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah,
I have a hard time sitting still, though. I am such.
I've hunted some deer with you and seen. Yeah, I'm like, man, David's just moving.
I can't. I guess it's just the ants in my pants maneuver, but I just, I have a hard time sitting still.
I don't think much about the low profile thing, and that's something I'm taking away from this. Maybe there's some opportunities there where I should just have a lower profile.
Yeah, instead of being up high,
standing up, maybe get down on my knees, and certainly you want to practice shooting down on your knees if that's the way you're going to hunt as well. But definitely something to take away from it. But yeah, I think he's got a great point. I don't care what kind of camo you have. If you're moving, they're going to see that.
And I think that goes too with your draw cycle on your bow. Because I think there's a lot of guys out there that have too high a poundage. And they do that sky draw maneuver where they got to aim at the moon and come down on it. I mean, that's such a big movement. That's
true.
I mean, I couldn't tell you how many people I've seen do that. And I'm just like, if I was an animal, I'd be running away. I'd be like, oh, here comes an arrow.
Yeah, the less movement, the better, certainly.
So I think if you have a lower poundage where you can just pull straight back, then that's one less thing you have to worry about on that movement.
Yeah. I've had so many instances where the elk has seen movement and I've froze, and then they just, obviously they just hang upright, whether it's deer or elk, whatever it may be. But in this instance with elk, they just stare at you, right? They're like staring through you, and you just don't dare move. But as long as you don't move, they're confused.
Yeah.
They're just like, they're trying to figure out what that is. And so, movement's super critical. But get you some awesome camouflage. As you mentioned, that Walmart camo, the sweats, the $10.
Well, you can store your treats in your sweats if they have the little cuff on the bottom.
Oh, nice.
Then you don't have to worry about a backpack because you've got sweats.
Yeah, I think that first backpack I bought, I don't know where I got it. But man, it was like a little kid's school backpack, I remember. And I would pack that thing so full and tight, and it would just be tight on my body because there was so much
dug
stuff
in your
there.
back.
Yeah. We've definitely come a long way. That's one of the things that's interesting in this book. I think I'd mentioned earlier. He talks about technology. It's pretty outdated on the technology side of things, so maybe you don't need to worry so much about reading that section. But overall, it's a great book. Sure. Even in this camouflage section, I thought, well, camouflage has come a long ways over the years. Maybe it's not so pertinent, but he makes a great point about he don't care what kind of camo you got.
Right.
Movement's so critical. I really enjoyed this book, and we mentioned earlier we're gaining nothing from this. We're not promoting it in any way or getting any
kickback,
financial gain from this. It was just a book that I had seen at Sportsman's Warehouse. It looked like it'd be an interesting read, and I did. I really enjoyed it. So I'd recommend it for any of the listeners that looking for a good book and just to try to learn more about elk hunting tactics. And
again, the book's called Elk Tactics, and it's by Don Laubach and Mark Henckel.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you could find something like this on Amazon too. I wouldn't doubt.
Yeah, I looked it up. There's multiple sources. You can get it directly from their website as well. I can't remember off the top the website name, but if you look it up, you'll find it.
Sweet.
So
it was a good time. I'm excited to read it. Lance is going to lend me the book and give me some.
I've done all the highlighting for you.
That's right. I saw it. I was looking through it. Ooh, that looks good.
Well, that's what's kind of fun about for any one of us is when we hear a story or read a book, we pick up on things differently, right?
Yeah.
Or things that just resonate with you. And so there's probably, you're going to read through that book and you might highlight completely different stuff, things that are going to resonate with you.
Yeah.
So.
No, it makes sense.
So I look forward to implementing some of these things. Like I said, I've highlighted them, I've written them down, and there's some things I'm going to include in this year's hunt.
Add to the repertoire.
And if it works out because of one of these things, I'm going to come back and then I will promote it.
There you go. You have to do this.
All right.
Cool. That was a good one. Thanks, Lance.
Yeah, that was fun. We hope everyone enjoyed it. By no means did we try to go through the entire book. I think there's like 216 pages. Is that what's in there, Dave?
A little bit more than that, 224.
Okay, so yeah, there's a lot of information in there. We covered such a smidgen of it, so
yeah,
didn't want to get it all covered all because we only have so much time on the podcast.
That is true. We could read it word for word, but that would get very boring. Yeah. So go read it and use your own imagination, as they say.
It was a good read while I was at Disney World.
That was boring.
That's brutal. Boring.
Take me to Disney World of Hunters, a.k.a. Alaska.
That's sad when you're excited to come home and mow the lawn. I couldn't wait to come home and mow the lawn and work in the yard. That's pretty bad.
Yeah, you're supposed to be on vacation. It's supposed to be fun.
No. All right.
That tells you where Lance's head was.
Exactly.
Not at Disney World.
If you looked at our Instagram feed, I think I'd posted some elk. There were some elk antlers there in
I did see
Magic Kingdom. I
some
posted
teeny
those.
little suckers.
Yeah. And we were on that Frozen ride, and there's that, is it a reindeer, whatever, from that show?
Yeah.
I was like, oh, some antlers on that.
What kind of guy is that?
Yeah, so that's where my head was, especially because a lot of hunters are out shed hunting right now.
Yeah.
And so it looks like a lot of fun. We haven't had a chance to get out. Sure like to, but all right. Well, thanks everyone for listening to today's podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Please give us any feedback you'd like to. We'd love to hear your feedback, and we'll talk to you later.
Sounds good.
All right, we'll see you.